I'm Yonit Levy of Channel 12 in Tel Aviv.
And I'm Jonathan Friedland of The Guardian in London.
And we are Unholy, two Jews on the news from Keshet Podcasts. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello, Yonit. How are you doing right now?
I don't know how much you can talk about how you're doing. Like, you have this feeling like the world is on the brink of World War III, and we're like, oh, so how are you?
Yes, exactly.
I don't know. Can you do small talk in this sort of tense situation?
It's very difficult. And also, by the time people hear this, who knows, Russians may have invaded Ukraine. It could happen. I thought your answer to that question was going to be that you are excited, because I'm quite excited by our very special guest on the podcast.
Yes. It took us, a year to bring him on? Yes,
It did. It took us a year, but he has been a devoted listener to our podcast, which is why that adds an extra delight to having him on as our main guest.
So it will be David Remnick, the editor of The New Yorker, the best publication in the English language. I hope I'm not insulting other publications in the English language. And we have so much to talk about. You know, he is a Russian expert, and we want to talk about Russia, but we want to talk about a lot of other things about Israel and the U.S. and the Jewish world and The New Yorker itself. I think we have a lot to talk about.
David Remnick, I think, probably one of the most highly regarded journalists in the world. And my formulation is that The New Yorker is the premier weekly magazine in the world, thereby passing no judgment on other, perhaps, daily newspapers. But yeah, a huge privilege to have David Remnick on Unholy.
David, we are so honored and happy that you're on Unholy.
I'm delighted to be here, your loyal listener.
And we're so glad to hear that. We will quiz you at the end of our conversation about our different episodes.
And I would pass.
I think you will. I think you will. We want to talk. I want to kind of start out with talking to you about Russia. Obviously, I don't know if you'll shy away from this title, but you are a true Russian expert. You were, as I said, the Moscow correspondent at the age of 29, I believe, and you follow Russia to this day extremely closely. You wrote recently in The New Yorker a piece titled Putin's War Game. And you write of the Russian president, increasingly he has become the philosopher and enforcer of the authoritarian rule. To what end, David? Like, to put it quite plainly, what does Putin want?
Well, what does Putin want? You know, like Freud said, what do men want? Vladimir Putin is posing himself, and for many years now already, as the clear-eyed realist of the way the world works. And his entire rhetoric is around how hypocritical the West is, how hypocritical liberalism is, how the West, and particularly the United States, poses itself as a liberal society. Look at all the problems they have, whether it's poverty, income inequality, and they're a social mess. He's a social conservative. You know, he makes fun of the notion of gender fluidity, for example, much less homosexuality. There's disdain for that that's open. He is posing himself as a kind of social conservative against a West that's gone way too far toward decadence. That's one thing. And he has made it plain that his predecessors were far too weak in the face of Western triumphalism following the period of 1989 to 1991, which is when I happened to live in Moscow. That the whole business of Francis Fukuyama and all the social arrangements of the world are now settled into a kind of liberalism, to him is baloney. He is the ultimate man of interests. And what you're seeing now on the Ukrainian border, whether he invades or not, is an attempt to reassert Russian power, Russian greatness. He has managed to establish an image for himself all over the world as the ultimate competent leader, even though Russia, in fact, is quite poor. And it's, you know, if you think there are oligarchies in the West, well, you know, you've never been to Moscow. So that's just the beginning sketch of it.
What interests me is, first of all, that you managed to get through that answer without making the Freudian slip that I often make, and I've even noticed in an earlier interview years ago that you did it too, which is you didn't describe it as Soviet, or you didn't talk about the Soviet tradition or something like that. There,
well, it's been a long time. It's been a long time since Soviet.
Except though, people sometimes do it where they're talking about Russia, they move seamlessly to the Soviet Union, and
but Jonathan, here's the one thing that Vladimir Putin never cared a damn about is communist ideology. The people in the West were obsessed with communist ideology, communism, Bolshevism, and all the rest. Ideology died to such a degree that even in the Brezhnev era, people didn't take it terribly seriously. Putin is an extraordinarily, I hate to use the word gifted to give it a positive spin, but on his own terms, he's quite gifted, but he's constructed something that is not necessarily lasting, which is to say a kind of plutocracy or oligarchy, as people describe it, that's centered on him and his mortality, his existence. Everything funnels through him at the top. So one hears, for example, that there are Russian generals at serious ranks who think it is the height of craziness to think about invading Ukraine for all kinds of reasons, military reasons, domestic economic reasons, and so on. But there's no telling, there's no accounting for the feedback system, the normal feedback system of Russian politics, because it all takes place inside of 1 square foot, which is the head of Vladimir Putin, and he loves this.
The interesting thing, we're looking at it from the outside, and everyone is using this traditional war jargon, right? It's like missiles and tanks and soldiers and invasion. All this is, of course, consequential. But if Putin is anything, is he's proven to be so sophisticated in the way he operates, right? In cyber warfare, in poisoning his political opponents, right? He has a lot to do with what happened in the US in 2016, a lot to do with what happened in the UK in 2016 with Brexit. Why do we think necessarily that the only thing he can do to Ukraine is traditional war? He can do all kinds of things.
I don't think we do. I think that we're fully aware that his capacities include all kinds of weapons, and at the very top of his military intelligence apparatus are people who are expert in what we've now come to be accustomed to calling asymmetrical warfare. It's not lost on Putin that even in the face of NATO writ large, or the United States, that doesn't have superior forces, but he marshals them quite cleverly. And I think the West's reaction this time around, as opposed to 2014, is a determination to not be, won't get fooled again, as the old song goes. That what happened with Crimea was a surprise. It took the West by surprise. One day Crimea was Ukrainian, and the next day there were the so-called, remember the little green men, the unmarked soldiers that everybody in Russia pretend we have no idea who these people are.
Maybe they got the uniforms from a fancy dress store, I think.
Exactly, or the Philadelphia Eagles, or somebody from that have a green background, and then within a matter of days, it was very clear who it was, and the population was marshaled in such a way to keep it quiet. Ukraine is extremely poor, and it was accomplished. And so, of course, he has other weapons. He could easily try to declare victory through means other than, sending missiles and tanks into Kiev.
I'm struck by your observation about it's all about the 1 square foot of Putin's brain, because much of the commentary describes, Russia wants this, Russia wants that. And the thing that's missing, I think, from a lot of the coverage is what Russians want. We know what he wants.
But that's the whole...
Right. But from your sense of it, what do you think, is there any Russian, as opposed to Putin, appetite for the grand sphere of influence, for Ukraine itself, for the kind of imperial reach that the Soviet period, the Tsarist period entailed for Russia? Do ordinary Russians still have those needs and wants that Putin very cleverly plays to? Or is this really him?
Not in a cartoonish way, no. I think most Russians, like most human beings, crave fairness, stability, economic well-being, the security of their children, healthcare, all those kinds of things. I don't think Russians wake up in the morning and think about the reestablishment of the Russian Empire or the Soviet Empire. But remember a crucial difference here. As chaotic and as screwed up as our own information systems are in Britain or the United States or Israel or wherever, because for all the factors that we know, it is immensely different in Russia. That discourse, to use that fancy word of the moment, discourse is so distorted by the Russian government's control over so much media, particularly television, which is so dominant. And it's very much harder matter to control the internet, but even so-called liberal outlets in Russia, like Meduza, which is a terrific online outlet, or a television station called Dosht, which means rain, TV rain. They have now are branded by order of the government as foreign agents. And that puts a crimp in your day, too. So the amount of control of information in Russia is really hard for us to understand, and immensely more sophisticated than the period when I was there. Immensely
You
more
watch Russian propaganda TV a lot, right?
Do I watch it?
That's your guilty pleasure, isn't it? You watch Russian propaganda
up to a point. It's different than watching cooking videos, but yes, I do watch it. It's very important to do so to try to understand it. For a Russia expert, that's hard for me to brand myself because I haven't lived there in a long time, and I watch on TV, people going on and on about what Putin's going to do and what he's not going to do. It's really important, I think, for journalists to say when they don't know what's going to happen. And I get really tired of watching people on morning chat shows and news and op-eds. Putin's going to do this. Putin thinks this. This is just it's bullshit sometimes. We have to know what we don't know and admit it. And if you're going to ask me, is Putin going to invade? I do not know. And that should be a starting point of the conversation. And that is something that he really seems to relish. The putting off balance of the world, the notion that he's this kind of omniscient chess strategist.
So let's talk about something that you won't get on much of the coverage elsewhere. I want to ask you and talk about Jewish attitudes to Russia. My question is, did Jews have a very strange, given that one way and another we all came from Russia, do we have a strange sort of Ashkenazi Jews? Do we have a blind spot there?
Look, I think a lot of immigrants have a complicated, willful forgetfulness about there. It's not just Jews who emigrated from Russia. Look at the math, and the history is horrendous. I am sitting here talking with you because a couple of Jewish peasants decided to maybe get out a little early. My relatives were in Vilna, which became Vilnius, which is part of the Russian Empire, and they managed to get to the west in the early part of the century. My other grandfather, Ukraine, very typical arriving in the United States in that period between 1895 and, say, 1910, 15. That's the bulk of American Jewry. And I don't think most of us certainly don't think of ourselves as Russian. Think of yourselves as from Jewish immigration from there. It's a very different thing. I don't think of myself as Russian.
So word on the street is indeed that you are Jewish.
I've been told.
How does that? I mean, I'm sorry if this is a silly question. How does that manifest itself?
Oh my God! How can it not?
We can add an extra hour for this podcast. Don't worry about it.
I did not grow up in a Jewish town, but I grew up in the Jewish community of those towns. I went to public schools, and if they were 5% Jewish, it was a lot. But on Monday afternoon, Wednesday afternoon, Saturday and Sunday, off to what was called Hebrew school, it was very different from an Israeli existence. And New York, and I and I live in New York, which is an anomalous city in terms of Jewish population. And as saturated as I am with, American history and literature, I also read deeply as much as I can in Jewish civilization. This is my inheritance. How can I reject it? I see my, Black friends. Henry Louis Gates, I just interviewed for an interview issue that we've done online, and this interview will come out on Sunday. And here's Skip Gates from West Virginia, from the tiny Black community in Piedmont, West Virginia, and he ends up at Yale, and he's introduced to, on the one hand, the canon of what was then completely white American literature, but he wants to read at the same time African and African American literature. And how do these two become part of your canon? That search and saturation doesn't end. So that's one thing. And also, as a reporter, it's not by accident that I've gone to two places abroad quite often. Russia, where I lived for 4 years, and then I went back and forth there a lot, and to the Middle East, and particularly to Israel, and which is a source of complication and pain and joy and real concern.
See, to you, I would say,
about it a lot.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, go ahead.
No, to you it would be, and to me too, actually, it was automatic and obvious. As you said, it's no coincidence. Of course, if you're strongly Jewish, you're going to be going back and forth to Israel. It's going to be in your head, even in the complicated way you've alluded to there. Do you look at the next generation of American Jews and see a similar automatic connection that one entails the other? Tell us about that.
No, and that's a source of great concern to me, and I think it would be a source of great concern to Yonit and the Israelis, I think, but some Israelis that I hear from, in fact, obstinately think it's no concern at all. I live in a kind of mixed Jewish existence in the sense that my wife's family is modern Orthodox, and some of them live in Israel. And let's just say that their views, I don't want to caricature them, are distinctly more right-leaning than my own. I'm a much more secular Jew, and grew up, in the way I described, with semi-knowledge, not a lot of it, but I'm not just a lox and bagels, jokes Jew. It's something that's very serious and permeates my thinking and reading and concerns and all the rest. And I am deeply concerned about the present situation, not only in my own country, deeply concerned, but also about Israel. I think each in their own way face historical and moral dilemmas and crises that we risk shoving under the rug for the sake of today's seeming stability. And I think we know what we're talking about here. And I worry that particularly the more secular Jews in America, younger generation, see Israel, and this is going to be a painful thing, but it's not a new thing for any of us to hear, as a source not of pride or affection, but of embarrassment and of embarrassment because of the obvious, because of the Israeli-Palestinian issue. And some of the young are very knowledgeable about it, and some are not. But it is a source of, I think that there are a lot of secular Jews, that kind of younger ones, that, to put it mildly, don't have any special affection for Israel, and just the opposite. And I worry about that. And I remember seeing when, talking to an Israeli diplomat on the right, who we all know, and his disdain for Obama was powerful. And you felt this among throughout the Netanyahu group. And it was especially focused on the notion that he quote unquote, he has no kishkas for us. He has no affection for us, which in fact was utterly wrong. In fact, Obama had real concern about Israel, but it was the Israel that he related to was the Israel of a diminishing left, of the David Grossman,
Amos Oz
world
Israel.
of Tel Aviv, as it were. And I remember writing a long piece on Haaretz, and not just because it was a newspaper, but because it was representative of a, forgive me, Yonit, maybe I'm wrong, but I think a diminishing Israeli liberal culture that's highly centered in not only Tel Aviv, but as it were, Tel Aviv. And, and knew a lot of people there and so on. But I wanted to write about it as an entity and also what it represented, because I wasn't just only going to come write about the right, which I also have. And I heard from Obama about this, and he wanted to, and he already knew, but he was concerned because to him Haaretz represented the kind of South Side of Chicago milieu of Jews that he knew well, and he was gravely concerned that was diminishing, and of course he's right. He's right.
Does the Bennett-Lapid government change that in a way, even a little bit? I mean, the fact that really, there's a diverse coalition and an Arab party and, all these kinds of things that sound good better for a liberal ear. Not at all. You wrote about Naftali Bennett extensively. This doesn't surprise you, his centralization?
As they say in
or
Scoop, only up to a point, Lord Copper. Yes, I think, look, Netanyahu represented a level of obstinance and also deception, too. This occasional, rhetoric where to please usually periodic U.S. presidents that he was interested in solving the Palestinian problem, but he had no intent. As we now know, that was really, he was not at all sincere about this. Naftali Bennett himself has changed a bit. And yes, this is a mixed government. And I think that there are people that are slightly encouraged that that Netanyahu is, at least for the moment, gone. But the underlying conditions and the what we read about every day and the Palestinian situation is not a hell of a lot different. It's just not. And nobody sees any way out. And in fact, what we see is nobody really caring very much, including post-Trump administration, including some Arab states who, in the height of realpolitik, have, for all kinds of reasons, shoved the Palestinian question to the side in favor of forming closer relations to Israel, which may be stabilizing in some ways, but it certainly leaves the Palestinian people in a fix.
And in terms of the echo you saw, and you mentioned there, between the two countries, the dangers that you alerted us to just a second ago in both countries, I'm not going to ask you which one you think is, going to get to that endpoint first, because that's silly. But I'm interested on what the warning bells, the warning alarms you've been sounding about America. You have gone, and I think it's been extra shocking because you're not a hot-headed guy. You're a very temperate guy, and yet you've been writing through the Trump period and even since as if the whole thing is meaning American democracy is potentially in jeopardy and in peril.
I think it's an emergency. I think it's a prolonged emergency. In other words, I never thought, Donald Trump, this is very funny. Those of us who grew up in New York and read Spy magazine and the New York Post, he was a figure on the jokescape of New York. He was like Leona Helmsley or
Page Six kind of thing.
Page Six clownish figures in the New York lineup.
Yeah.
But no, my great grandmother, who was married to what I call the last Jewish Adolf, they lived in Coney Island in Trump housing, and the old man would release these balloons over the beach in Coney Island, and the balloons would pop, and you'd get a $15 discount on your apartment. And these were scam artists, racist scam artists, and who made it kind of big in a glitzy way in New York. But I have thought from the first that he was an emergency, and on election night, I was at one of those parties you go to because I wasn't kind of working. We had all our Hillary Clinton pieces lined up and ready to go for the first woman president, da-da-da-da. To be sure, she is not this, but, okay. Yes. So all those pieces were lined up to be released on the web at, the moment, Ohio was called or whatever the hell it would be. And of course, by about 9-something, it was obvious we were in trouble. So from a journalistic point of view, I happily had my laptop, went into this person's kitchen and wrote furiously a piece that was, you're right, far less temperate than I'm usually accustomed to. And it was called An American Tragedy. And it was unbelievably pessimistic about Trump. And the real fault of that piece, it wasn't nearly, it didn't possess nearly enough dark imagination to match what the realities would be, how insane the next 4 years would be, how malicious, how malevolent they would be. And the legacy they've left, I think, is even worse, even if he's never elected again.
What if he is in 2024?
Can we not go there? But it's a real concern. You're 100% right, Yonit. I mean, he could be. He could be. Joe Biden is not in a strong position. People are elected. I remember George H.W. Bush, who was a reasonably popular president, and there was a kind of downward glitch in the economy, and there was also a third-party candidate, Ross Perot, and that helped Bill Clinton win. It's not because Bill Clinton was some unbelievable political magician. The conditions were right at a certain time. Shit happens, and it happened. It could break that way because you have a country that's just in a distorted state of mind, a large part of it. We don't trust elections anymore. I live in a country that too often has a weird notion of itself as exceptional in so many ways and permanent, as if political systems are permanent, as if reasonably good times are permanent. And one of the things that happened in the mid-'60s is that for the first time in this constitutional democracy, we had the chance of having a multi-ethnic democracy, which is to say you had voting rights and Civil Rights Act were passed. But it is entirely conceivable for all the factors about voting, about the direction of the Republican Party, about many other factors, that could be short-lived. And do I expect there to be a civil war with people in gray uniforms and blue uniforms in Antietam and, a replica of the mid-19th century? No, I don't. But look, politics and the destiny of a country can turn very, very quickly. In the late 80s, early 90s, look at Israel. Things were going quite well and then you started to have this kind of counter-revolution and the Netanyahu campaign and the incitement of a community. That assassination of Rabin did not come out of nowhere. I'm not saying millions pulled the trigger. That guy pulled the trigger. Amir pulled the trigger. And the repercussions of that assassination in Israel are immense. My concern is that January 6th, which had precursors in things like the McVeigh bombing in Oklahoma City, and the rise of white nationalist politics and militias and the normalization of that kind of political dialogue and political culture is unbelievably corrosive and could lead us to bad places. I'm not saying we're going to resemble somewhere else, but the notion that somehow history is just one giant curve upward is a fairy tale. So I didn't mean to come bum you out, but I don't think I'm delivering any special news.
I just want to say that the mood was changed because of Jonathan's
It is his problem. Yeah.
No, okay. Just to put the blame where it should be. Can I ask about, as a paying subscriber, can I ask a little bit about The New Yorker? Is that okay? I think I'm entitled to ask.
Are you having trouble opening the subscription on your end?
I'm waiting for my tote bag.
I swear to God, people will send me emails and say, I'm having trouble, and I get on it. I get on it. I'm a full service editor.
I want to hear the top man. I want to see the top man. That's another very Jewish thing, right?
Exactly.
Let me complain to the top man.
Get me the manager.
Exactly.
C'est moi.
So as the manager, I mean, you've been the manager for 24 years.
Yeah, don't tell anybody.
As editor. I mean, you have managed to preserve The New Yorker as this, symbol of excellence. It really goes against the trends in media, right? I mean, there are the 10,000-word pieces, the reporters that work for months on a story, the small yet dedicated army of fact-checkers. How does all this sustain itself? I mean, the Jewish mother in me wants to ask, David, do you need any money? But really, I mean, how is this?
As long as you're subscribing,
just don't up the subscription is what I'm trying to say.
I'll make it very quick. Our business changed. In other words, the Guardian business changed. It went from being a commercial newspaper to something based on it was based on a foundation from the start. No,
it always was owned by a trust. Yeah, always.
Yeah, and something amazing happened in the Guardian more recently, which is to say, you would see at the bottom of articles, please also send some dough. And I thought, oh my God, this signals the end. And in fact, correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan, because people want what you do, they've come through, and that has stabilized the economics of The Guardian.
Correct.
I'm sure it has all kinds of...
Yeah.
The fact is, our media landscape has been decimated because for a number of reasons that Craigslist first took away all the classified advertising from newspapers, particularly regional newspapers, local newspapers. Then the next step was Facebook and Google scooped up 80% of all the advertising everywhere. So I grew up in New Jersey. And every mayor of Newark, New Jersey went to jail until Cory Booker. Every single one. And why did that happen? I think no small part of that. You had rigorous journalism going on a local level. And now that's harder to do. In fact, it's damn near impossible. There are all kinds of, But what you've had is that a small number of publications at the top, the New York Times, is the most blatant example, have been basically able to say, look, advertising's dried up, but you, dear reader, particularly you, prosperous reader, need to pony up. If you want this thing at this level, I'm thrilled about the New Yorker's success. I'm thrilled that we're able to do what we're put on earth to do. What concerns me is who's going to send the corrupt judge to jail, who's going to cover the coal industry in West Virginia.
When you took the job as editor back in 1998, you were a prize-winning writer. Did you think, wow, I'm going to take the editor's chair, that means I'm going to give up essentially being the reporter writer, but actually, as it's turned out, it's worked out fine and you do both? Or did you know going in, I'm going to be able to keep both of these plates spinning?
I haven't kept both of them. I do write from time to time, but they're mostly short things. And the thing that I really loved doing as a writer were deeply reported pieces. I did maybe once a year. I've done something like that. I have a complicated life. I can't get up and go take a vacation like a normal person. My wife and I have 3 kids, and one of them is really very profoundly autistic. And so we can't just get on an airplane and go to France for a week for a break. It just doesn't work. And so my way of getting away a little bit was, to to come to Israel and report about the rise of Naftali Bennett. And, it's an odd life, but that's the one I've got, and I'm deeply privileged.
Let me just ask you about 2 interviewees. I have to ask you this because
sure.
A question in my mind when Leonard Cohen died was, who was the definitive or most Jewish artist of the 20th century? And in my mind, it was a competition between him and Philip Roth. And as it happened, you spent quality time sitting down with both of them. Yeah. And so I want to know if you saw anything in the 2 people had in common, if there was some kind of golden thread between them, what might it have been?
Talk. The love of talk. Leonard Cohen was the best storyteller and a real literary and spiritual searcher. Very deeply Jewish, and at the same time had this kind of Buddhist search, and he would go away for long periods and study and exist as a Buddhist monk. Philip Roth was the opposite. Philip Roth thought religion was ridiculous. But of course he was extremely interested in things Jewish. I mean, read the books, read Operation Shylock, read almost anything. But that's cultural, and religion just did not interest him one bit. Other things did.
I think your piece on Leonard Cohen is my favorite David Remnick piece.
It's very kind of you. But he did all the work. Sometimes you do a piece and you're squeezing it out and you're getting little bits from them, and then you're using your entire brain. 3/4 of that piece, I think I used a tape recorder. He did all the work.
And you compared him to your mother, right? There's a whole paragraph in which he suggests food.
There was a bit of
kind,
food stripping. There was a lot of, would you like a bagel? Would you like a piece of herring? And there was a lot of that.
He may just edge it. In my little competition in my head with Philip Roth, the fact that he was stripping you with food, I think maybe means that he wins that sort of celestial competition.
I think it's quite possible.
Between
and Leonard Cohen, in the annals of politics, did one of the most sensible things I've ever heard of, which is to say, he died on election day before he knew the results.
Yes.
Because he would have died all over again, I'm afraid.
It brings me to ask a question that I hope will not put us, any of us, into deep depression. I mean, you've been a writer since what, like high school, basically? Maybe
since the
before?
19th century.
Jonathan has been a writer, I suspect, since preschool. I'm writing for television. I know you both don't think that's writing, but just bear with me here on this question. We have a great profession. It's standing in the sidelines and writing about the world. Does it matter, David? Does being a writer, is it important?
I don't think necessarily my writing matters, but writing matters. And it matters to my life, not what I write, but what I read, which is immeasurably. My life would be just so much poorer without writing. It's all I do. And the act of writing is to me is thinking, which is why I'm just okay at it. But far bigger brains. I just, it's not about reverence or revering, or it is the very best, the cliche, the very best of who we are on those shelves or in your Kindle or it's everything to me. Everything.
Did you say you're okay at it? You're just okay at it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the man whose first book won a Pulitzer Prize?
Those prizes,
I mean, that's ridiculous. But does it move? But the thing I read into Yonit's question there is whether it moves the needle or not. And what I mean by that is, take the example of Trump. We were all writing, and the New Yorker was publishing brilliant pieces dissecting Trump and leaving him in shreds, and still he gets elected anyway.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It can't do everything. But it's what we have. It's what we've got. And we also have images, and we have the plain reality of television. Look, I hate to say this, Jonathan, there are a lot of people who find those politics attractive because of his ability to play into the resentments of a lot of people who feel either those similar hatreds or who feel left behind or feel left out. Or who feel that this group is getting a leg up on me, and I'm somehow disadvantaged by it in what's seen as the zero-sum game of economic life. And his ability to play into that can't be completely defeated by a swift sentence or a well-crafted paragraph or thought. But it's what we've got.
I can't let you go without asking you. I mean, this has been definitely crazy 2 years. and I assume everyone has been working from home. Television, we were lucky enough to have still this newsroom and people still came to work. So you had the exchange of ideas or yelling of ideas because it's Israel, but you know what I mean. How does the New Yorker work if there's no physical presence of people in the office? Does it still work the same?
Well, thankfully, when we all went scurrying for home in what was it, the winter of 2 years ago, we didn't know how we were going to do it, but it turned out that we had just enough technological apparatus and know-how to get it together, and we haven't missed a week or a day. And there's been a lot of meetings. We're on Zoom now. There's been a lot of that. And is there a happier moment in your life at sometimes when you press that little red leave button? Because it just ain't life. It's just not. And I fully expect that we'll be changed by this experience, and that work life will be more flexible, and this will have touched our experience going forward. But I really do miss, even crave, not just for the convenience of the manager, but just to crave, three-dimensional conversation and, the incidental conversations that happen in a newsroom or in an office or in a theater or whatever. Even in hard times, the ability to see a friend who's sick or who's lost someone, or to deal with life not on the telephone, not by text, not by Zoom, is I can't wait.
David, I'm not itching at all to reach for the red button, but we've kept you. We've kept you a long time. This has been a wonderful conversation.
It's a great pleasure, and it's a great pleasure to listen to you both every week.
We're really grateful.
And we're so honored that you do. Thank you so much, David.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, David.
Take care.
So that was a very interesting conversation. Jonathan?
It really was. He's not going to disappoint, is he? I mean, it's sort of maddening in a way. He's not only a brilliant editor and writer and reporter, you also, listening to him, just think, how is this guy not, a broadcaster day in, day out? Because he would just have cleaned up in that field as well. Just a brilliant talker, and that was a great conversation, I thought. Well,
those of us who listen to New Yorker Radio are also kind of contemplating, how does he not talk more on this format? But yes, I agree that there were some parts there that you kind of wanted to listen to on and ask more questions. And these areas, the time is always your enemy. You're like, we're running out of time.
We could have easily done hours and hours and hours. Now, we have awards to give, to hand out. And I'm going to go first, if you allow me to.
Of course.
So my chutzpah nominee is the man known to Netflix viewers around the world as the Tinder swindler. He is the Israeli Shimon Hayut, who defrauded, or alleged to have defrauded, a series of women. He met via the dating app to the tune of, it is said, $10 million. He did it by pretending he was the son of the Russian-Israeli diamond dealer Lev Levayev, changed his name, created an alias, and so on. The chutzpah bit is that he has now said, he's thinking of his future, of course, and has now said that, from here on it's only up. And he fancies a role in politics and says, foreign minister would suit me down to the ground. I think this, Yoni, is Olympic levels of chutzpah. A man emerges from jail, age 31, saying, I think of the senior ministerial portfolios available in the Israeli government, the one that tickles my fancy is foreign minister.
I don't know. The one thing he did is make us look bad, right? Make Israelis look terrible. So I don't know if foreign minister is the best thing for him to do.
It may not be a natural fit. No, I agree.
Definitely a chutzpah award that is worthy. I want to give the mensch award of the week, if you'll allow it. I think the woman I want to give this award to is really the definition of the word mensch, and she is Dolly Parton. Like, who does not love Dolly Parton? Just right off the bat, right? In a country so divided like the United States, I assume the only thing that brings everyone together is their love for Dolly Parton. And the reason she is on our mensch list this week is because she said that all of the people who are employed in her theme park, Dollywood,
yeah.
So I'm sorry, I've never been, but I wanted to be. She said that all of the people who are employed there will be paid their full college tuition. They will receive health insurance, and there will be childcare for free for people who have children. That is for the people who are employed in her park. I think that is a wonderful example. She's also, I think she gave more than $1 million to the vaccine industry to basically make these and market these vaccines. So that's also a good thing. But she's a wonderful person. I remember a piece in 60 Minutes, and when she said she always pretended to be the dumbest person in the room, she was actually the smartest, and that was how she kind of got ahead in life, which I thought was incredibly.
No, she is a totally deserved legend. Musically, obviously, Jolene. If there's a better pop song or better 3-minute song, do direct me to it. But Jolene is a brilliant song.
9 to
but
5.
Also, yes,
Just kidding.
She is. No, I don't think that's in the same league, Yonit. But I think in terms of mensch. Didn't she have this brilliant initiative about making sure every child got access to books?
Yes.
And got books all over the world. I think even in British libraries or British schools, there are books that have come via the Dolly Parton Foundation. I mean, just amazing. Totally deserved winner of mensch.
We're in full agreement today. I'm kind of worried.
Yeah, no, we are.
You?
I mean, I just love the idea of Leonard Cohen and Dolly Parton both getting honourable mention. But I was going to say that we should do our little subcategory of mention. I just want to make a little passing nod to Jay, which is a newspaper, the Jewish News of Northern California. The editor there, Sue Fishkoff, arrived at a newspaper back some 10 years ago and discovered that the archives of the paper, back numbers going back to 1895 or 1900, were crumbling in old leather-bound volumes and not even arranged in the office. And they are now available for free online through a whole association with the University of California and others. 127 years of history of the Jewish community in the Bay Area, preserved for future generations. And I just think that's just the sort of heritage that easily gets lost. And so a little mention for Jay, the Jewish News of Northern California.
That was just you trying to hog the mensch awards again. That's what that was when you were calling it the mention, wasn't it?
I never like to be without it. I also think that maybe we haven't, sung a sufficient number of hymns to print journalism in today's podcast. So I wanted yet another one. But yeah, no, I agree. I do to always like to be on the mensch action, and I think that's a deserved mention. But Dolly is our winner.
Okay, so we're wrapping up our program and giving an honorary mensch award to David Remnick just before we leave. And we're saying
big time.
And we're saying our thank yous to Rom Atik, Lior Friedman, Omer Primat, to Irad Eshel for original music, and our big thanks to Richard Myron. And Jonathan, you have an important announcement for our listeners?
I do. We often say, please do contact us. And some people have done that via Yonit's Twitter or my Twitter. But we now have a newly minted email inbox of our very own. So all you have to do is email unholy at keshet-tv.com. Unholy at keshet-tv.com or -tv.com. That is the email address. Meanwhile, do please spread the word whichever way you like. Review us, give us a rating. We love that. We're on Instagram at 2Jews. But now you can tell us what you think of the podcast, what you'd like us to talk about, what guests you recommend.
And send in your questions for Jonathan.
Oh, and questions for Yonit as well. Unholy at keshet-tv.com. is the email address. Yonit, we will see each other this time next week.
We will.